Welcome to ESPN 1025 The Game's Game on Demand as the NFL Draft is only 2 weeks away. Jared Stillman alongside ESPN's Trevor Matich and ESPN.com's Turron Davenport as we break down the Tennessee Titans in the 2020 NFL Draft. So before we get into the guys that may be available when the Titans pick in the first round at 29 or later in the draft, I think we have to start with the draft needs and looking at the Titans and who they may need. So, Turron Davenport, we start with you. When you analyze the Titans roster, now that the first wave of free agency has passed, what do you see as the draft needs for the Titans?
As we stand right now in free agency, with Logan Ryan not being re-signed, I think cornerback is the biggest need on this roster. And specifically, they need a guy that can bump inside and play the nickel. Along with that, he has to be able to help and run support and be a guy that they can send on blitzes when they need to do that, because another need is pass rusher. And my thing is, when you look at Vic Beasley, I definitely feel that there's talent there, but I think you need someone else that could complement him in addition to Harold Landry, because you basically have the same player on both sides. I think you need a big, heavy-handed pass rusher, a guy that can also set that edge when you need the run support. So those are the two needs. And then you could also actually have to consider running back too. I'm not saying Derrick Henry needs to be replaced, but you need someone that can come in and spell him and be a guy that can help you out on third downs.
I think there's going to be a lot of interesting aspects to look at the Titans in terms of what players may be available when they pick at 29 overall. Because as you said, I agree with you with all of those aspects: a corner, a pass rusher, and a backup running back. We probably feel good backup running back would be there at 29, probably not where they'd want to go. But Trevor, I want to bring you in now. When you look at how this draft will unfold, we know the Titans would love to have Chase Young. That's not going to happen. What do you think are the kind of players that will be available for the Titans if they stay with their pick at 29 overall?
You know, I think the kind of players will be guys that could step in, contribute in year one, and develop into solid starters. Typically, the Chase Young guys, like you mentioned, Jared, are the game-changing playmakers that you don't find at 29 unless you get lucky or unless someone falls. I think Jeffrey Simmons, their pick out of Mississippi State last year, defensive lineman, he was hurt. This year, they expect him to be fully healthy. It's like they get an extra first-round pick. He's a talent that should have been top 12 or so that fell. And the thing about that concept is that in order to get that kind of a game-changing playmaker, if a guy doesn't fall, they'll need to decide what kind of player they need and what kinds of things they'll compromise on. Because at 29, they'll probably need to compromise a little bit, whereas at 5, they wouldn't have to compromise at all.
TD, what do you think about players that will be available around the 29th pick?
No, I agree with Trevor. I think it's going to be a little bit of a stretch to get an instant impact guy. The way they struck gold last year with A.J. Brown, I'm not sure that that's going to happen again for the Titans, but you're going to get a guy that could come in and help out in a situational aspect. And I think that's why you really have to look at the production that a lot of these guys have done on film. And again, it goes back to cornerback. I think if you get guys that can come in and help out as a nickel, you know, those are the type of guys that are going to be there. Ones that, you know, you could look for in a situational role.
Let's talk about maybe some of the corners that will be there, sitting there at 29. Specifically, TD, we'll start with you. When you think cornerback at this point in the draft, knowing that some of the big-name guys, Jeff Okudah and probably C.J. Henderson of Florida, will be off the board, what are some corners you have your eye on?
Well, you know, I start with Jeff Gladney, and I think he just fits the DNA that the Titans have, because when you look at him, he's a scrappy player. You watch the Texas game, he and Colin Johnson, we're talking about a 6'6" receiver. They went at it really well. You look at the game against Mims from Baylor also. So I think he matches up. He's a guy that he has the athletic ability to be able to pattern match some of the shorter, shifty receivers that you'll see in the slot. And I think he has the speed to run with the majority of them. So I think he's a good fit. You also look at, you know, a guy like Trevon Diggs. And I don't think he's one that you could bump inside, but having that length and that athleticism out there on the boundary, I think that is really good as well. So he's another corner. he's still raw, right? So you still have to develop him, but that's the type of guy that upside you could get at 29 and really make something out of it. Another guy that comes to mind is Noah Igbenogany, and he's another raw prospect. He's only played corner for 2 years, but you look at all the measurables, they're there. The guy loves to compete. He's a high-effort guy, which matches what Mike Vrabel wants. So he's another one, and then he has the speed. We're talking about a guy, his father was a world-class triple jumper. His mother was a medalist in the Olympics. So that's someone that could definitely help out. He has the genes in him to be able to do what you need on the outside.
Trevor, we always talk about safe picks. And at 29, you will always be able to find a good player in any draft. Maybe not a great player, maybe not an all-pro player. But, Trev, who do you think could be maybe a safe pick for the Titans if they want to – they're keeping their team together. They want to make sure they add a quality player. If I were to say the word safe at 29, what would you think?
I would say safe at 29. I'll give you two names that I kind of like there. Andrew Thomas of Georgia could be a kind of mauling right tackle that the Titans lost when Jack Conklin left in free agency. Now he's got some limitations in space with his footwork, but I think with NFL coaching he'd be fine. But from a standpoint of maintaining that downhill, physical, brutal rushing attack that is the foundation of this Titans team, I think he would be a relatively safe guy because that mauling nature that he has won't go away. And then if Justin Jefferson of LSU falls to that point, he would be a fascinating pick. I think it's interesting that the Titans, when they finally petered out last year in the playoffs against Kansas City, did it because the passing game wasn't able to take over, when the running game stalled in the second quarter and never got going for the rest of the game. And so if you can add weapons, if you can add capability in the passing game with a guy that's so amazingly productive like Jefferson or even T. Higgins of Clemson, then I think you'll be able to upgrade the thing that stalled them out when their season ended.
TD, what do you think in terms of a safe pick perhaps at 29?
I love Trevor's mentions. Both of those guys are really good options. A safe pick for me, I'm going to go back to Gladney, but I'm also going to look at Marlon Davidson. And you guys know that I'm a big fan of his game. And I think when you look at the departure of Jarrell Casey, you need someone else that you could put on that front to go alongside Daquan Jones and Jeffrey Simmons. And I talked to Marlon Davidson about the opportunity to play alongside Jeffrey Simmons, and he was really excited about it. And it would be like what he did at Auburn, he and Derek Brown. So I think if you get a guy like that who he gives you some juice coming off of the edge, he's a high-effort guy. You watched the LSU game 2 years ago. This guy ran down a wide receiver that took a sweep. He ran him down 40 yards down the field. That's the type of effort that if I was a coach, I would want that type of player. And he's an impactful guy. He's able to get to the quarterback. He may not get you high sack numbers, but he's able to affect the quarterback and help out the guys on the outside, whether it be Harold Landry or Vic Beasley. So he's a safe pick for me. I would also look at one of the receivers. I tell you a guy that I really like that I think is going to be there is Brandon Ayuk. And you look at what Ryan Tannehill last year, 9.6 yards per reception or completion. Make no mistake about it. The bulk of that came from A.J. Brown's yards after the catch ability. Tannehill has a good way of him as far as being able to throw in anticipation and lead his receivers and allow them to accelerate to the ball and through it and then get the yards after the catch. You get the Yak Monster part 2 in Ayuk, and I think you're in good shape. And then he has long arms. He's very secure with the ball. So he's a guy that gives Tannehill a large catch radius as well.
Daniel Jeremiah has. Go ahead, Trev.
I like what you said about Marlon Davidson and upgrading the pass rush even more, because when you've got Deshaun Watson in Houston and now Phillip Rivers, Colts, the more you can degrade the performance of the opposing quarterbacks, the better. And I tell you, you're never wrong upgrading the pass rush.
Exactly.
So we heard TD's needs, Trevor. Let's look at maybe in the later rounds. Who are some guys that, because obviously the first round gets all the hype and everyone wants to know what the Titans will do at 29, but they've got picks in the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and they've got 3 7th-round picks in this year's draft. Trevor, what are some guys that maybe stand out to you later in the draft than maybe the 1st or 2nd round?
I think A.J. Dillon running back out of Boston College is an intriguing prospect in the middle to later rounds. And the reason is that he's got a lot of physical similarities to Derrick Henry. He's huge. He's about 245 pounds. He runs a 4.5 40. So in the open field in a straight line, he can get up and go, much like Derrick Henry can. Now, he's not particularly shifty. He only catches about one pass a game in college, so we think he can catch, but we're not sure. So he'll have to show that he can be effective on passing down. But the kind of workload that Henry gets requires that he be spelled once in a while in order for him to have maximum effectiveness, not just later in the seasons, but later in his career. And the thing about Dillon is that when you take that battering ram of Henry out of the game, the defense thinks, okay, we won't get smashed in the mouth so much. Here comes Dillon, and he keeps wearing them down. And then a fresh Henry comes back in. That's a nightmare for a defensive front. Then you got to think also for the future. I mean, the franchise tag on Henry, they might not be able to sign him or might not want to sign him to a long-term contract. And if Dillon, in his rookie year, as a mid to late round draft choice, is able to show that he can carry the same load in a similar way, if not quite as good, and that gives the Titans a lot of freedom of movement in terms of what they do with their leverage relative to Derrick Henry going forward.
TD, what do you think about later round guys?
Hey, man, much respect on the A.J. Dillon mention. And the thing with him that I really like is this past year, he put the get somewhere shoes on. You started to see a degree of explosiveness with him. So that's an awesome mention. For me, I'm going to stay on the offensive side, and I'm going to go to Memphis and talk about Antonio Gibson. And this is another one that he has some jets, 4.39 at the combine, and it shows on film. You rarely see this guy caught from behind. But in this whole quest to find positionless players, he's one of the guys he can play running back or receiver. Just imagine having him in the backfield and motioning him to the slot, and then you have him run a post against the linebacker. It won't be fair. So again, with Tannehill, you want to find ways to get free yards. And he's the guy that will get you those free yards. You could dump a pass to him 5 yards, and he'll take it the distance. But then if you want to go downtown, you could throw it, and he'll track the ball down. He's a guy that I think is not getting the pub that he should get, and he's a prospect that I know a lot of NFL GMs and personnel folks like. So he's someone I would mention. Then on the opposite side of it, Oklahoma cornerback Parnell Motley. And watch the LSU game. There's a reason why Justin Jefferson put up those numbers. They were lining him up opposite Motley. Most of the time when Motley was on Chase, he put the straps on him. So I like the way that he press covers. You look, he averaged, just to give you some numbers, he averaged 28 snaps in press covers per game. So you're getting a guy that could come in and play the type of defense. If you need to go man-to-man, he's equipped to do that. I think it's a crime he wasn't invited to the combine, and he's not getting enough conversation about him. He ran a 4.5 at Oklahoma's pro day. So he has not the long speed, but he can run with, guys on the outside, but he's feisty. And one of the ways that I always compliment a corner is I say to myself, is this the type of guy that if I had to practice against him, we would fight a lot? And he is that guy. If I had to practice against him, we'd fight every day because he's feisty. And he's one of the Cortland Finnegan, think that type of player. And that's what I love about him.
Turron, what do you think the Titans could do in this draft to help out Ryan Tannehill? Whether it's people always bring up wide receiver. This isn't a great draft for tight ends, but they probably are going to need one after losing Delaney Walker, and then obviously offensive tackles. What do you think they can do in this draft to help Ryan Tannehill?
I think what they could do in this draft is just get guys that can get those free yards for him. Really, you have to focus on working to his strengths. And whether that be allowing him to dump the ball to a receiver on a screen or, a running back out of the backfield on screens, bottom line, you need guys who get yards after the catch. That's what you need. But if you could double it and have it be a guy that can stretch the field, I think that's the ultimate way to help Ryan Tannehill. I'm not overly concerned about the tackle position, frankly. I think Dennis Kelly, you go from Conklin to Kelly as far as a pass protection perspective, I don't think there's much of a drop-off, and I think Kelly will be fine there. So I don't think you have to go out and get a starting right tackle. You obviously want to go depth. But for me, it's all about getting that guy playmakers, and I think you have to do things to allow him to continue to play with the confidence that he played with last year. Because if you could highlight that and support it, I think you're in really good shape.
Trev, what do you think the Titans can do to help out Ryan Tannehill in the 2020 draft?
Weapons. They had the running game that they needed last year, and this year I agree with TD that the right tackle position should be fine, if not as good as it was with Jack Conklin. I don't think it'll be a liability. So weapons. Now you talk about mid-round guys. There's a tight end out of Florida Atlantic named Harrison, who was amazingly productive at Florida Atlantic, and he's the kind of a guy that can be one of those weapons in the middle of the field that defenses will sort of forget about because they're worried about A.J. Brown and Corey Davis. All of a sudden now, if you can work the middle of the field really well, you create a lot of mismatches, and Bryant has the potential to be able to do that. And then, TD, you mentioned stretch the field. One guy that I really like is Denzel Mims out of Baylor, wide receiver. He is a guy that I think is not getting the attention that he should because there's so much attention on the guys at the top, Judy and CeeDee Lamb and Bruggs and those guys. The thing about Mims is that he runs in the 4.3 range. It's sub 4.40. He's really fast. Now, you'd have to game plan for him because he hasn't shown the ability to get off the press all that well. But with his speed and with his ability to track the ball in the air, if they can game plan for him and he can stretch the field, it'll open everything up underneath. And you talked about A.J. Brown and yards after the catch. Well, yards after the catch have even more space to happen if the safeties are deep because they're afraid of speed. That speed is something that would be a new addition to this type of offense.
Guys, it should be interesting as the NFL draft 2 weeks away. Of course, we'll have full coverage all day. And, of course, for the draft all night and all weekend on ESPN 102.5 The Game. Trevor Matich, ESPN, Turron Davenport, ESPN. Guys, thank you so much for joining us for Game on Demand.